Welcome to another cooking video from West Howe Community Enterprises. This week we're going to be making chili con carne with rice, although I should say that chili con carne goes brilliantly with loads of other things. So if you don't fancy it with rice, a nice hunk of fresh bread or with jacket potato will be equally as good. So we're going to just focus on making the chili. The ingredients of this will be in the comments underneath the video, but a quick summary of what you're going to need. So you'll want about 500 grams of minced beef. This is lean mince, and you need an onion, medium size, and a red pepper. We have this this slightly longer style of red pepper because the supermarket were all out of the short ones. You'll want your tomato puree, some chilies, these are ready chopped, some garlic, again this is ready chopped, you don't need to use ready chopped, you can use a bulb. We have couple of tins of tomatoes, we have a tin of kidney beans, some vegetable stock and some vegetable oil, and then some rice to go with all of that. So the first thing that we're going to do is just turn on low heat and put a little bit of oil into our pan just to start getting that warmed up. You obviously don't need to turn on your heat early if you're using a gas hob, but my electric hob takes a few minutes to warm up. So I'm just going to put about a tablespoon of vegetable oil in there and just let that start to warm. And while that's happening, I need to chop up my onion just into small pieces, take off all the outside, ready to pop in there. Might make your eyes water a little bit depending on how juicy your onion is. I'm going to pause the video while I do this so that you're not watching me, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so I've just removed the outside layer of the onion. We've got the nice crunchy middle, and I'm cutting it up pretty small because we don't want big chunks of onion in there, but it's totally up to you. And the oil's getting warm now, so we can pop this straight in. Once your onion is in the pan, you want to cook that for about 8 minutes so that it's nice and soft. And while that's happening, we can prepare the next ingredient. Okay. I just need to periodically give that a little bit of a stir as well. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to add in is going to be our garlic. So we'll just get that open ready. We're going to put in about a teaspoon of garlic into there, and we're also going to add our red pepper, which is going to need to be chopped. So I'm going to just give that a little bit of a rinse under the sink, and then we want to cut this quite finely and take the seeds out from underneath it. And I'm just going to make a start on that now. Okay, so we're just going to chop the pepper up while the onion's cooking. Similar to a normal bell pepper, we just need to cut it in half and take all the seeds out. Some people like to leave some of the seeds in because it adds a bit of heat, but I'm not a big fan of the texture and it's all a little bit too much for me. So I'm just going to take all of this out and pop it in the bin. And it's good to get rid of these white pieces because they don't taste great. They can be a little bit bitter. And then we're going to just chop this up really finely so that it can cook and get nice and soft. Fast forward. Okay, so the onion has cooked away nicely there. It's starting to soften, go a little bit golden. So I'm just going to add the garlic now and let that cook for a minute. So I really love garlic. I'm going for quite a generous teaspoon, but have a look and see what works best for you. If you're using cloves of garlic, then you probably want to use about 4 for this, just depending on the strength that you want. So I'm going to give that a stir and just turn the heat down slightly so that it's cooking but not burning, and give that another minute in there. And as you can see, I've got my red pepper is all cut up nice and small. You will be able to tell from my slow cutting that I'm not a chef, but it doesn't matter how long it takes you to cut it up. As long as it's done, it's going to taste great. The next stage, once the garlic has just had a few more seconds there to cook, is that I'm going to put the mince in. Now, my mince is going to look probably different from yours. I'm using a plant-based mince, so it can be cooked from frozen. But if you're using normal beef mince, then you want to cook that from chilled. So just be aware when you see this, it might look a little bit different from yours to begin with. So the next stage is going to be to pop that in there. Just give that one more stir. Oh, see, I have an actual block of plant-based mince here, but that will very quickly break down. So I'm going to pop that in there with the lid on so that starts to melt. And open the tins of tomatoes and get those ready to pop in, and I'm going to boil the kettle for the stock. Okay, so if you're using beef mince, then you want to cook this until the beef's browned. So you're about 3 or 4 minutes, depending on your pan and your heat. And you want to keep stirring it to make sure that it doesn't obviously stick to the bottom of the pan. Where I'm using a plant-based mince, it behaves a little bit differently. So I don't need to worry about browning it. So I'm just really letting that get some heat so that it defrosts and mix it in with the onions. So I've got my tins of tomatoes ready to add into there and everything else. And we're also going to add some stock, which will just give a little bit of extra flavour. I've got a vegetable stock cube, but you could use a beef stock cube or a chicken stock cube. Either of them are going to taste great. It just gets all soaked in and just make sure that you've got a really tasty sauce with your chili con carne. So you're going to be cooking your beef and letting it brown, or whichever ingredient you've decided to use. Once you're happy that it's a little bit browned all over, the next thing to add is the tinned tomatoes. So I'm going to carefully pour those in, try not to make too much mess. We've got 2 tins of tomatoes because we're using 500 grams of mince, so we want it to be nice and moist, have lots of sauce. We don't want a dry meal. Obviously becomes a little bit more difficult to stir because we've got a lot in the pan. As I pointed out in the soup recipe last week, if you feel that your pans aren't big enough to be able to do the big batch that we're cooking, you can always split the recipe and do it in 2 pans and just do it that way so that you've got room to stir. But this is now breaking down nicely. The other things we need to pop in here are a spoon of chilies. So I'm using this ready chopped chili. You can use fresh as well, just be a bit more careful with your eyes. I'm going to put in a teaspoon and a half of a teaspoon because I want that extra heat. But I would say err on the cautious side because you don't want to find that you've made your meal too spicy to eat. So just maybe 1 teaspoon to be on the safe side, and then you can always add more next time. Give that a bit of a stir. Hopefully yours is a little bit easier to stir than mine at this stage. And then we're also going to put some dried mixed herbs in here as well, just to complement the flavours. So I'm going to put in a teaspoon of dried mixed herbs. This particular one, I mean, it's quite normal combination. It's thyme, marjoram, oregano, parsley, sage and basil. So it's just a little bit of all of the popular herbs. Kind of goes with pretty much everything. So it's a really useful thing to have in the kitchen. Even better if you've got fresh. If you've done some planting during lockdown and you've got some fresh herbs growing, put those in. They'll be even nicer. Okay, a little bit of a stir. We're also going to add some tomato puree. I would suggest about a tablespoon, but we're not hugely into weighing and measuring with these recipes because we don't all have scales. And I don't have a tablespoon, so I'm just going to squirt in about a tablespoon in there. That just adds a little bit more of a deep tomatoey flavour to this. With that, you can always add more towards the end if you feel that it needs it. once the chili is nearly cooked, you can do a taste test and see if you think there are things that need to be added in. And then what we're going to do now for our stock, we're going to use one of the empty tomato cans and just crumble the stock cube into the tomato can. And we're going to then top that up with some boiling water to make our stock. And that will give us around about the right amount. So we're gonna fill it up to about halfway. So that's about 200 ml. So I'm going to pause you while I boil the kettle, and then we'll make our stock. Okay, so I've got my boiling water, and I'm just going to pour a little bit into the bottom of the can first to dissolve the stock cube, because we don't want this to be lumpy. Give that a stir. Some stock cubes will melt a little bit better than others. This one's looking pretty good. And I'm going to fill that up to halfway. And over here in our pan, you can see that that's all mixed in nicely, and it's starting to smell pretty good too. So we're going to pop the stock into here. Some of that moisture is going to cook off, but we really want to avoid having anything that's dry at the end. So that should be about right. And I'm now going to add in the chilies that we chopped up earlier so that they can cook. Okay. There we go. Give that a bit of a stir. I've got just enough room to be able to stir this. I hope that you're finding the same thing. It's got a really nice colour to it. So I'm going to take the spoon out now and pop the lid on to let that cook. So depending on how this goes, and we will try it before we serve it, we probably want to cook that for about 25 minutes. So I'm suggesting that you set a timer on your phone or your oven, or just check the clock, because it's really easy to forget and get distracted. But about 25 minutes for that. On the side, we need to have ready our tin of kidney beans. We'll need to drain these and just rinse them with a little bit of running cold water, and then they're going to go in a while. And then we've got our rice as well. So I'm going to have rice with my chili for dinner tonight. So if you want to have rice, then you need to make sure that you start cooking it in time. So we're going to have 25 more minutes of this. Then we're going to pop the kidney beans in, and then we're going to have a final 5 minutes of cooking time. So just make sure that you've got your rice ready, and I'll come in and let you know when to put that on. The instructions on the packet will usually suggest about 75 grams of rice per adult, and you want to have boiling water ready with a little bit of salt to put the rice in, and it takes about 10 to 12 minutes to cook. So we're just going to allow that amount of time, and we're also going to rinse the rice first. Now, as I've mentioned, I don't have a scale, so how am I going to measure my rice? What I tend to do is to use just a dessert spoon, and I find that about 6 or 7 dessert spoons rounded with rice is about right for me. But you'll be able to work out how much you need. So I've just got all of that ready to go, and I'm going to keep an eye on this, keep an eye on the oven timer, and I'm going to come back to you in 25 minutes. Okay, so my timer's just gone off to tell me that a chili has been cooking for 20 minutes now. So I'm going to start to prepare the rice. I'm just going to check it and give it a little bit of a stir. There's some really good smells coming from this pot, and I'm pretty hungry now, so I'm looking forward to eating this. I can feel that it's started to thicken up a little bit as well, just where the vegetables and the meat have absorbed some of the moisture. So that's looking good. If you stir it and you find that it's starting to stick or it feels a bit too dry, you can just add a little bit more water to that. You don't want it to be really, really wet, but you don't want it to be dry. And just simmering away there, you can see little bubbles coming up. So that's fine. It's just going to keep going. So I've got my rice in my strainer, and I'm just going to rinse that under the cold tap until the water goes clear, just to get rid of the sort of outside starchiness of the rice. And I've got a kettle of boiling water to add to this, but if you want to just bring the water to the boil in the pan, then you'll just be adding this to the water. Now I'm just making enough rice for one portion, because rice isn't great when it's cold and it loses its texture, and I think we've all had incidents where we've found out that it's not good to reheat rice. So on the whole, I would just cook however much you need, and then if you're having this again in a couple of days time and you want rice again, just cook it for that meal separately. So I've got my boiling water. I'm not measuring this out, I'm just making sure that the rice is really well covered. And you can, if you look at the instructions on the packet, it will tell you how much water to use for the rice, and it usually suggests to add a little bit of salt too. So I'm just going to put a little bit of table salt in there and pop the lid on. And that's now going to take about 10 to 12 minutes on a low heat, because it's already boiling, just for the rice to cook through. I tend to check it a few times on the way just to make sure that it's not overcooked. So your pan over here with your chili needs about 5 more minutes, and then we're going to add the kidney beans, and then that will be done. So I'm going to put you on pause and set a timer for 5 minutes. Okay, so we've had another 5 minutes, and the chili con carne is just simmering away beautifully, and it's time to put the kidney beans in. The rice is doing its thing. That's going to need about another 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm going to give this a little stir first. It's pretty full, but I think we have room for kidney beans. So I've drained the tin out, and I've just rinsed under running water to get rid of the slushy bits, and I'm going to pour these in here. These add great flavour and texture, and they're also really good for you as well, and they're super cheap, so it's a great thing to chuck into any meal really. Just give that a bit of a stir. Also, if you're a fan of kidney beans, there would be room in here to put 2 cans, but I know people don't necessarily like to have the whole chili dominated by them, so that's completely up to you, but you could definitely afford to put an extra can in there if you like. This is a good time as well to just check the flavour of the sauce and see if you might want to put any extra salt in there, or herbs, or a bit more tomato puree, or a bit more chili. So just grab a spoon. Wow, that's really delicious. I'm going to add a little bit more tomato puree. The chili content is fantastic. It's got a nice warm finish, but not too hot. And I'm tasting all of the flavours. So I'm just going to add in a little bit of extra tomato puree, just to give it a bit more depth and thicken it up a little bit too. You really can't go wrong with this stuff. And it's fine to add it at the end like this. Give that a stir. Wow, that's got my stomach rumbling. Okay, so I'm going to put the lid back on and set a timer for 5 minutes, by which point the rice should be done too, but just keep an eye on that, and also don't let it boil over, as I'm quite frequent for doing. I'm going to set the timer, and I'm going to put you on pause, and in 5 minutes time hopefully it will all be done. Okay, so we have had our final 5 minutes cooking, and the rice is looking done. So I'm going to drain that out ready. If you're not quite sure, then just eat a little bit of it, but don't burn your tongue like I just did. I'm just going to drain that out over the sink. Okay, so that's going to go straight into my bowl there. And I am going to spoon some chili on top so that you can see the finished product. Now, if you're not having rice, obviously whatever you're having on the side of it, I'm sure will go a treat with the chili con carne. Some people like to have a bit of sour cream with this. You might want to pop a little bit of grated cheese on it. It does go with most things, really, really flexible. Definitely, if you're having this with a jacket potato, throw some grated cheese on there. That's going to be a really, really good combination. I'm going to turn off the heat, and wow, that smells amazing. I'll just bring that over so that you can see the lovely, rich red colour there that's taken on. That's looking and smelling gorgeous. I'm going to give it one more stir before I serve it because those juices are just sitting at the top there. Excellent. Okay, so this is your chili con carne, and I hope that you enjoy yours as much as I'm about to enjoy mine. This recipe should make you 6 good sized servings. So what I'm going to do when I've eaten my bowl is I'm letting that cool down, and I'm going to put some of it into the fridge for tomorrow, and I'm going to put some of it into the freezer. You need to make sure that you put it in the fridge or the freezer within 2 hours. Don't leave it sitting out overnight because that can be a bit dangerous with food poisoning risk. So leave it out, just let it sit for up to 2 hours with the lid on to cool down, and then pop that in the fridge, and then you've got something for the next day. And you can reheat that from the fridge, or if you've frozen it, then defrost it in the fridge first before you reheat it so that you get all those great flavours. I hope that your dinner is as delicious as I think mine is going to be, and I hope you join us next week for our next recipe. Have a look in the comments for information about the ingredients and the method, and if you're in West Howe and you want to sign up for one of our cookboxes, then just follow the instructions in the comments. Thank you all so much. Goodbye.